Interesting. This over in Kansas right now. This was published yesterday, day before yesterday, on the Topeka Capital Journal. And it's a letter to the editor. The title, it's by Vern R.C. McFalls in Topeka. And the letter says, I read the recent letter to the editor concerning the need for verification of the November election vote and found it interesting. The scenario outlined was what I experienced as a poll volunteer. Right? What's happening right now is the Wichita State University's a mathematician working at Wichita State University believes to have found basically the mathematical smoking gun that the voting machines in Kansas were hacked and the Sam Brownback didn't actually win the governorship. And so there's an actual lawsuit against Chris Kobach, who is the Secretary of State. There's several different articles about this in different Kansas publications, calling for greater transparency and all this kind of stuff. But here's this letter from an election volunteer. So I'll just read it straight through, and you can draw your own conclusions. Speaking of the cancer stage of democracy, and President Carter just a few minutes ago on this program saying we have become a full-blown oligarchy. And the sooner you can pull that clip out of it, Shano, the better, because I want to play it again in the next couple hours for people who are just tuning in. But back to this letter. I read the recent letter to the editor concerning this, if you just tuned in, this is from the cjonline.com is the website. It's the Topeka Capital Journal, the Topeka newspaper in Kansas. I read the recent letter to the editor concerning the need for verification of the November election vote and found it interesting. The scenario outlined was what I experienced as a poll volunteer. In the gubernatorial race, we experienced unusual issues with voting machines. The recent letter mentioned the voting machines showing a swing to Governor Sam Brownback during the last 30 minutes of the election. We experienced the same. In other words, at the polling place where Vern McFalls was working. We experienced the same. In fact, I believe Paul Davis, that would be the Democrat running against Sam Brownback, I believe. In fact, I believe Paul Davis was showing a small lead throughout until the polls closed. As we pulled tapes after closing our site to check for irregularities, we saw Brownback had pulled ahead in the last 10 or 20 minutes. Keep in mind, the voting machines were acting strangely throughout the evening. After the close, at least one decided to not give up its tape output without, quote, thinking about it, end quote, which is how I would put it. When I left more than 2 hours after the polls closed, it was still printing tapes sporadically. Our poll manager and another person from the opposing party stayed as is necessary. Verizon wireless 3G sending units were in use for the first time to send data to centralized data collection points. When I mentioned this to a friend who is an electrical engineer and builds boards for communications and broadcast equipment, he rolled his eyes and said, "What a simple but reliable way to throw an election." That evening was the strangest I've ever had working the polls. Do I think the elections were hacked? You bet I do. It wasn't just me either. Others as well voiced suspicion. Our poll manager was getting calls all evening from other poll managers who were having all sorts of problems. I leave it to you, but everything I heard and saw that evening pointed to hacked votes. Wow. And then, the story of the lawsuit is, pretty straightforward stuff. The Wichita State mathematician sues Chris Kobach. Chris Kobach, by the way, besides being the Secretary of State in Kansas, is the guy who has compiled this giant voter database that covers more than 20, I believe more than 30 states, where he says that he is where. Well, the allegation is that there's a whole bunch of people who are voting twice because they're registered in more than one state. Now, it doesn't make any sense, but it's being used. It has been used to knock apparently hundreds of thousands of people off the voting rolls of a whole bunch of different states. My personal opinion, and I have nothing to back this up other than just, the stories of how many people got thrown off the voting rolls in Colorado, for example, is that between Colorado, between a whole bunch of people being thrown off the voting rolls in Colorado, mostly Democratic voters, because of this database that Kobach has, and Mara Eliason talking on NPR in the 2 days before the election nationwide, but of course everybody in Colorado was listening to it, basically saying, "Oh yeah, no, he's not, the crazy guy that you think he is." Got him, helped him win the election, in my opinion. Helped Gardner win the election as the senator from Colorado. But back to Kansas. This is Roxana Hegeman, writing for the Associated Press, published in the Topeka Capital Journal. A Wichita State University mathematician sued the top Kansas election official Wednesday, seeking. This is Wednesday of. Wait a minute. This must have been last week. Oh no, actually, this was a couple months ago, April 1st. So what we need to do is find out where this thing is going. A Wichita State University mathematician sued the top Kansas election official Wednesday, seeking paper tapes from electronic voting machines, an effort to explain statistical anomalies favoring Republicans in counts coming from large precincts across the country. Beth Clarkson, chief statistician for the university's National Institute for Aviation Research, filed the open records lawsuit in Sedgwick County District Court as part of her personal quest to find the answer to an unexplained pattern that transcends elections and states. The lawsuit was amended Wednesday to name Secretary of State Chris Kobach and Sedgwick County Election Commissioner Tabitha Lehman. Clarkson, a certified quality engineer with a Ph.D. in statistics, has analyzed election returns in Kansas and elsewhere over several elections that indicate, quote, a statistically significant pattern where the percentage of Republican votes increase the larger the size of the precinct. While it's well recognized that smaller rural precincts tend to lean Republican, statisticians have been unable to explain the consistent pattern favoring the Republicans that trends upward as the number of votes cast in a precinct or other voting unit goes up. In primaries, the favored candidate appears to always be the Republican establishment candidate above a Tea Party challenger, and the upward trend for Republicans occurs once a voting unit reaches roughly 500 votes. Clarkson says this is not just an anomaly that occurred in one place. It is a pattern that has occurred repeatedly in elections across the United States. This is fascinating stuff. But this letter to the editor was posted day before yesterday, so this has been going on April, May, June, July. This is 4 months. We're 4 months into this thing. What is going on in Kansas? I mean, it's Tom Frank wrote the book, what's the matter with Kansas? I think it's an appropriate question to be asking right now. And is it happening all across the country? And why are we continuing to use these electronic voting machines when Ireland tried them in one election and said this is crazy and literally sold them for scrap metal? The companies that make the electronic voting machines are universally run and controlled by Republicans who in some cases have been very partisan. Wally Odell, the former CEO of Diebold, was in Ohio. This was back in the election, the John Kerry election, 2004. He said, we are committed to helping bring in Ohio for President Bush. Now, I'm willing to believe that Wally Odell was talking about, Diebold or he was going to make donations or whatever, not that he was admitting that he was going to hack voting machines. But why, if it's so easy to hack a computer, and apparently it is, hackers have gotten into the CIA, they get into the NSA, they get into, they took the Office of Personnel Management, they've got the records of tens of thousands, millions of federal employees. If it's easy enough to hack those, and you got voting machines that are in the cloud, right? They're sending information via Verizon. It's like this. How stupid do we have to be? 15 minutes before the hour, after the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So have we hit this stage of oligarchy where we're not even really a democracy anymore? It's all just charade.